Part 2 of our beekeeping series, we're going to take a look at Mossy Oak Properties land specialist Sean Maloy's farm here in North Carolina and look at specific examples of how bees are influencing the native habitat on his property.
Mossy Oak Properties, where outdoorsmen find their favorite place.
All right, in part 1 of our beekeeping series, we learned a lot about bees and literally got our hands dirty in a beehive, which was really cool and learned a lot. But in part 2 of this series, we're going to get a kind of a hands-on approach and specific to Sean's farm here in North Carolina. We're going to go to several different spots on his property and see bees in action, seeing the role they play on your property.
Yeah, I think it's important for you to understand by seeing is believing, so to speak, how the importance of bees are to farms and to properties in general, because if bees aren't around, they don't pollinate. If they don't pollinate, we don't produce fruit, we don't produce vegetables. And like we were talking earlier, every soybean pod that, every soybean that creates a pod that came from a pollinated flower from a bee, right, or some other pollinator. So if we don't have bees, we don't eat, and if we don't eat, we die. But I'm going to show you what we do for bees to help them survive and how they reciprocate to us to maximize our garden, our flowers, our wildflower fields, and our food plots.
Absolutely, yeah. Sean's piece of property is really impressive because there's a lot of different habitat types scattered throughout of it. And we took a drive earlier and we saw old field, pollinator patches and wildflowers, clover food plots, even a water hole. And as we drive around, we don't really think that bees would make use of all those different habitats or the role that they would play.
Well, what they're doing is they're looking at resources.
Right.
They're like any animal. They need things. They need food, they need water, they need shelter, cover, and they will go out and find those resources. So food in the form of pollen, and in nectar from flowers in the morning, for example. And then they need water, and they get water from all kinds of sources, whether it's up around our house or down by the creek or down by the water hole that I have. They are going to go somewhere to find water. They need a lot of water to make nectar and honey, right, and also to keep the hive cool during the summer months. So we're gonna see some of that and talk to you about what's going on and why is that important to us and why it's important to the bees.
Absolutely, let's take a look.
All right, let's go. Well, here we are. We're in a food plot of sorts, but it's not a food plot for wildlife as far as animals. It is a food plot for my bees, and this is in the form of buckwheat. And buckwheat grows really easily and doesn't require a lot of maintenance, and it creates a nice flower head that creates a lot of nectar in the morning and then pollen throughout the day when it's really active. And then it will produce a hard seed, and this seed will fall to the ground, and I can get at least one more crop of this without having to replant it, and the bees will continue to have a food source for a couple more months. The other thing that's important about buckwheat, just from a habitat person, is it is great as a green cover crop and a green fertilizer. So it burrows its roots down into the soil pretty deep, and it brings up some nutrients from the soil closer to the surface. So if we were to plant another crop in here, like a food plot, that food plot would flourish with that nutrient and the biomass that buckwheat produces. So this is very simple to plant. You can broadcast it by hand, and you'll be amazed that a lot of beekeepers do that. They create a little 10 by 10 square of it and broadcast buckwheat for their bees. And here I've got the luxury of a little bit more space, as you can see, around our orchard that we plant, and we get, like I said, a couple crops out of this, and it helps the bees, and the bees are literally 25-50 yards away from these plots, and so they don't have to expend a lot of energy to find this resource, and that helps my bees live a little bit longer because they're not stressed out from long forage travel. So buckwheat's a good, simple way to attract bees, and it doesn't have to be a big field like this. You could do this in your backyard if you wanted to support your local pollinators. So buckwheat's a bee-friendly crop, and highly recommend you plant some. Well, Cody, here we are right outside of the house, And we have our own little small scale garden and agricultural center going on. And none of this would be possible without our bees. And you can apply what I'm about to talk about to a super large scale where they're trucking bees in to pollinate large fields. Here we have some squash, and this squash has flowers on it. You can see the flowers, and those flowers have to be pollinated. Some bees pollinate them, and some other insects can pollinate them as well. We've got some jalapenos here with flowers, and these have to be pollinated to create the little fruit, which is the pepper, and you see some peppers growing there. So the bees are helping us create food. We've got some small tomatoes, and tomatoes require pollination as well. And over here is our cucumber vine. It's a little wilted from all the heat. It's in the heat of the day, but you know, we've got little cucumbers, and we do have some flowers, and we've got some pollinators. There's a bumblebee right now coming in to pollinate, and check it out. So having bees helps us produce food, and people really don't understand that there are some places out in the West where they don't have habitat for bees, and because they don't have habitat, they don't have bees naturally, so they have to truck them in. And you see on the news occasionally where a truck full of bees is turned over, and you're like, why in the world are they on the interstate? Well, that's why they're out there, is they're out there to support those agricultural and farming activities to produce food for our nation. So bees are very important. Without bees, we don't pollinate the flowers. If we don't pollinate the flowers, we don't get the fruit and the vegetables, and if we don't have that, we don't eat. So it's very important to realize that and do things that we can do to help the bees so that they can help us. It works for us, and it'll work for you, and just know that it's an important aspect of any ecosystem, but particularly in agriculture. Well, here we are in one of my native grass and wildflower fields, and as you look around, you see a bunch of flowers of all different types. Some are high and some are really low to the ground, including our clovers. And this wildflower field and native grass field does a lot of things for a lot of critters. It's great turkey brooding and places for quail to hang out. Deer put their fawns in it. Deer and other animals eat some of the plants that are found in here. So it's great cover as well, as we spoke about. But none of this would be possible without our bees, because some of these are perennial plants and we planted them, but some of them to propagate and expand, they've got to have seeds, and the seeds come from the fertilization of the flower, which creates the seed, which drops it on the ground, which grows and creates this little piece of heaven down here. And what's been really cool is that birds will eat some of this seed, turtles will eat some of the seed, and they will propagate it across the property. So our logging roads and trails that we have all have wildflowers popping up everywhere, and that's adding beauty to the property. So it's adding aesthetic appeal. It's also adding some food for my bees and other pollinators that are out there. And then it's also adding food for some of the wildlife that eat the actual plant, or the birds that get on here and eat the bugs that are on the plant. So it's just a whole ecosystem within an ecosystem, and it would not be possible without our pollinators, and in particularly the bees that we have in and around our property. So it's just, I just like to come down here and watch the bees work and watch the animals move around in here, and I've got trail cameras set up, and it's just kind of a magical spot. So if you have an opportunity to put something like this on your field, it's amazing the impact that it has, because the wildflower fields impacted our property more than anything I've done, except maybe timbering. We've had an increase in birds, we've had an increase in pollinators, we've had an increase in the aesthetic beauty of the property. Hummingbirds, we went from just a couple of hummingbird feeders to literally 8 in one season, because all of this brought the hummingbirds in. So it doesn't take a lot, but it has a large impact. And you know, if you just got a little corner of your backyard, you could do this. But if you have an acre like I've got here, it's a great way to help out your property and it's so easy to manage. I mow it once a year, and that's it. And nature takes care of the rest of it. And look at the results. Well, we were talking earlier about bees and how they support agriculture, and we think about row crops and gardens, but you know, bees also support our fruit trees. And this is an old pear tree we have, and it's pretty much loaded with pears. The deer are already coming in and trying to grab some of them, and they're bedding around this tree. And it's a very highly attractive spot for hunting in the during season. But without the honeybees, we wouldn't have all these pears that we have, and we've got some apple trees as well across the property. So having the bees around is very key to our hunting, and also for our pear pie and pear cobbler that my wife likes to make. So we appreciate the work that our bees do to help our fruit trees produce fruit. Well, what you might see here is a water hole that I put in for the wildlife, such as deer. And I've had deer and turkey and fox and coyote and squirrels and crows. I got a video of an owl landing here at night and getting some water. And that was the primary purpose of this water hole. And you can see by the tracks that the animals are in here every day and every evening. But what you might not know is that this is also a water source for bees and other insects. There's a mosquito larvae in the water here. We got frogs and tadpoles. But while we've been sitting here, we've had a couple of bees come in, and they've lighted on this mud. Here comes one now, right on cue. And they'll light on the mud and soak up some of that water and take it back to the hive. Now, imagine being a little tiny bee and having to haul water. We're literally about not quite a quarter of a mile away from the hive if they came from one of my hives. That's a long distance for these bees to have to travel for this resource. So we try to keep water up by the beehives in different various forms that they can get to. We've had a lot of rain here recently, so there's plenty of water holes and mud holes still around. But we stay aware that when things start getting dry and dried out, we start making sure that our little water bowls and stuff that we have for our bees are filled up, because they need as much of that resource to keep the hive cool, to create nectar and honey, and to sustain themselves. But this is a good place to find bees that need a water source. And if I see a lot of bees here when I come down to check trail cameras or something, then I know that I'm not doing my part to help them with that water resource, and I need to go check my stuff. But anyway, wanted to share that with you. This water hole supports more than just deer. It supports other wildlife as well, such as our honeybees.
All right, we talk often about managing for entire ecosystems as landowners and land managers, and not managing for singular species. We don't want to manage just for white-tailed deer. We want to manage for all species in an ecosystem, and I don't think there's a better example of managing for an entire ecosystem or the influence that one species has on an ecosystem than our bees.
I would agree. You've seen from our tour around our property how the bees impact just about everything. And they impact our garden, our flowers, our food plots, our fruit trees. But in return, we're doing stuff for the bees. We're planting buckwheat, we're providing water sources, and we're providing them some shelter via good hives to live in.
Right.
And in return, they're giving us some honey back. So it's a mutually supportive relationship, and one that brings us some pleasure as landowners and habitat managers. And it's just really interesting. It's cool and good to share with family and friends.
That's right. It seems like to me, I mean, as I mentioned in our previous video, I can see it on your face how much you enjoy it. I can hear it in your voice how much you enjoy the whole process of beekeeping. Not just beekeeping, but again, planting the buckwheat for the bees, putting it in close proximity to the hive, providing them a water source. It's a really satisfying and rewarding type of habitat or land management practice that you can incorporate on your property. And I know for me, I'm leaving this trip, I don't want to say I'm ready to take it on, but I'm more interested than I have been before, for sure.
Well, that's kind of the goal of this series, is to introduce folks to things you can do on your land. And then, as we mentioned before, it may not be something you want to take on, but there are plenty of people that would gladly put bees on your property and help get you started. They'll manage the bees, give you some honey, and it'll be a great relationship for everybody, especially the bees. And more importantly, it does great things for your property, and I think it's the right thing to do. If you're a habitat manager, you need to manage all the habitat as best you can and at the level that you're wanting to manage it. But we enjoy it, and it just really adds a lot. You know, I'm speaking from the heart, it just adds a lot of satisfaction that I'm able to give back to the land,
right?
You know, and it gives back to me, and it's again, it's a mutually supportive relationship.
Yeah, and that's the essence of stewardship, is to give back to the land and the wildlife, or to leave it better than you found it. And there's really, truly, maybe no better example than beekeeping and involving bees in your habitat and land management plans.
Mossy Oak Properties, where outdoorsmen find their favorite place.